Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today I've chosen to review an absolute classic because we are taking a look at the Jurassic Park Series 1 Kenner Spitter Dilophosaurus figure. This is a figure that is very near and dear to my heart. It is one that I played with so much as a child and absolutely adored, and I still to this day as an adult adore. Even though, you may look at it and see that obviously the quality isn't quite what you would see nowadays as far as figures like this go, I still think, like I said, an absolute classic and potentially the most iconic Dilophosaurus toy that has ever existed. So, without further ado, let's jump to a closer look and check it out from there. So starting up here at the head sculpt of the Dilophosaurus, you can see it looks pretty decent for its time. It's obviously got some pretty nice looking skin texture, and when it comes to the very first toy line, it's probably one of the closer to being screen accurate figures that they had released, because a lot of them don't really look exactly as they do in the film. I would say the Dilophosaurus, especially when it comes to like Crash McCreary artwork and stuff like that, like really looks like the concept art and stuff for the Dilophosaurus overall. When you get nice and close, you can see again maybe the head sculpt isn't quite up to par with the way it looks in the concept art or of course in the film, but I think it still looks pretty decent. And there's some nice paint apps to this one as well. You can see we've got a greenish tone for the primary body color of our Dilophosaurus. You also have kind of like a dark gray around the eye that leads up into the crest, and you can see a light tone, a light kind of like an off-white in the crest as well as here in the palate area. The eye is painted with a yellow, does have a nice black pupil. The mouth is always in an open position. It's never closed, and that is because this is a spitting figure, so it does spit water, and that is why the mouth is never closed. You can kind of push it closed if you really want to, because the figure as a whole is really quite flexible. You can see you can kind of bend it and stuff. It has almost like that real feel to pretty much the entire body outside of like the legs and arms. But on the inside of the mouth, you can see again with the mouth open, you've got the tongue sculpted out in there, painted with a pinkish tone. You do have a light, sort of different pinkish tone for the inside of the mouth on the upper side. Same thing actually. It's hard to tell. It kind of looks like maybe the same thing for the lower jaw, but the teeth are kind of like, the paintwork for the teeth is pretty much all over the place. And you can see that the paintwork for the teeth is a little sloppy. The sculpting of the teeth themselves, it's not really that great. They're kind of big and bulky, so they don't look super impressive, but I mean, I guess it's okay for what it is. And of course, considering the time, it's not that bad. One thing that is really quite cool, though, that you see on this Dilophosaurus is you see how the tongue is kind of split at the end. And I do believe that is the way the tongue is supposed to look for the Dilophosaurus. I know that's how it looks on the Horizon model, so I think there's a pretty good chance that that's the way it was supposed to look. So it's actually pretty cool that they have that on the figure. You can see the detail here in between the crests is a little generic, doesn't really look that great, but it's okay. As you lead back into the neck, you can see again some decent looking skin texture and stuff applied. You see more of that light tone kind of squiggling down the neck. You see more of it moving along the back of the neck. Same deal over here. In between those areas, you have that darker gray variation, and then here on the underside, you also have the green, or like the lower part of the neck. But if you go to the complete underside, you have a very different tone, almost like a purplish or maroonish sort of a tone that you have here on the underside of the lower jaw leading down into the throat. Really quite like that addition of the coloration. You can also see all of the wrinkles here moving down with what could be or should be the I guess you would say the frill kind of in a resting position, because this Dilophosaurus does not feature a frill. This figure, I mean, doesn't. But you can kind of see like the skin here wrinkling and stuff, which I guess you could look at as being the frill in a relaxed position. As you move down, you see we pick up more light tones, but it's kind of like almost like a light yellowish tone as you move along. And you can also see the skin texture does look really quite nice here for the underside of the figure. Moving down along the upper side here of the Dilophosaurus, you can see an extraordinary amount of sort of like larger bumpy scales moving down, osteoderm-like scales. You can also pick out the rib cage here on the side of the dinosaur. The skin texture and everything in the stomach region here I think looks really, really nice. As you move down into the arms, you can see the arms are held in pretty much the same position that you see in the film, where it's basically just standing there and has its arms out in front of it. That looks pretty decent. You've got some scoots moving down the fingers, nicely sculpted nails, but unfortunately no actual nail paint. Another unfortunate aspect is the fact that the arms do not articulate. You can see they don't move at all, so they are completely in one solid position. They don't go anywhere. But as you move down, you continue to see the dark gray that's kind of outlined with that lighter tone moving through. As you lead into the legs, you can see more of that dark gray up here at the top of the hip region, moving down into the thigh, but again that disappears, and you lead down, you basically just have the green down the rest of the leg. You do have the JP stamp there, right there on the side of the leg, and you can also see again more of the osteoderms. You've got the knee, the calf muscle, nice muscle definition in the thigh as well, and it's all sculpted really quite nicely. As you move down into the foot, you can see the foot as well looks pretty good. You've got some nice scoots moving down the front of the foot, down into the toes. We do have dew claws sculpted out and everything, also not painted unfortunately. You do have articulation in the legs, which is nice. You've got a forward and back, articulation as far as that goes, nothing else going on. And then as you move out here into the tail, you can see, unlike modern Mattel, we have coloration from head to tail as it leads out. Not only the upper coloration here with that darker, it's actually kind of looks like a dark green in some lights, but it's also more of like a dark gray. But you also have that lighter tone of the underside that leads the entire way out there through the tail. You can also see a little bit of a curve, very, very slight curve there to the tail as you lead out, and some more really impressive detailing the entire length of the way out there through the tail. And again, it is super, super flexible, so you can move that around. I remember having so much fun playing with this one just due to its flexibility. Of course, you're not going to see much of anything different on this side compared to the other side. Pretty much the same thing on both sides of the figure. But when it comes to the sculpt, again, it's probably not the greatest Dilophosaurus ever, but it is definitely one of, if not the most iconic, and probably one of my favorite Dilophosaurus figures to ever exist. Maybe that's just based on nostalgia, I don't know, but I love this figure. Now, something else that's actually quite interesting about this figure is there are actually two different variants of it. Now, there are definitely actually more than that, I guess you could say, as far as like repaints go. As time went on, there were repaints of this released, but as far as this exact color scheme and stuff goes, you can see this one features some holes on the underside of the feet. There are actually versions without the holes. So, not the greatest variation in the world, but there is a little bit of difference between this and the other version. I will say another thing that I have as far as this figure that I have an issue with, it doesn't stand too well. I mean, maybe at one time it might have, but I often have trouble getting this one to stand, and I have it standing right now, but who knows if it's going to stay that way. It's one of those figures where it goes, where you almost don't want to bump the table, because if you do, it's going to take a tumble. So we'll try that again, try to get a measurement before it falls. But as far as the size goes, lengthwise, you're looking at about 8.5 inches or 21.5 centimeters, and height-wise in this position, just a hair under 4.5 inches or 11.5 centimeters. Now, of course, you could alter that by moving the dinosaur up as far as like the legs and standing it taller. That's really up to you. But as far as the size comparison goes, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Dilophosaurus, Robert Muldoon in the Collect A human being next to our Kenner Dilophosaurus, and you can see again, it's definitely one of the smaller Kenner figures that were released, especially when it comes to the initial toy line. It's one of, if not the small, probably not the smallest, but definitely one of the smallest that they had released. Then we've got a comparison here with a Mattel Velociraptor, which you can see these are fairly similarly sized, as well as a Mattel Dilophosaurus, though very different as far as the pose goes. You can see they are kind of similar as far as body mass and everything. And this figure's been out long enough that I don't think we really need too many comparisons, but for one final comparison, we also have the Hammond Collection version of the Dilophosaurus next to the original Kenner version, again giving you a very good idea of the size. We're going to give this action feature a shot again. You can kind of see him spitting water. He doesn't do so great in his old age. And I remember when I had the figure as a child, I remember it didn't really last very long as far as the squirting action feature goes. It's possible that it's just not working too well in mine anymore. But It is again, and at the time it was definitely a fun action feature. So this Kenner Jurassic Park Dilophosaurus is definitely a very cool figure. It's probably one of my favorites from when I was a kid. I remember absolutely adoring this figure as a child, and even as an adult, again, with just how nice the sculpt looks and everything, it is really quite fun and definitely very near and dear to my heart. I've often considered taking one and repainting it. I actually have quite a few of those. I'm not sure if I have both of the variations. That's one thing I've never really checked to see if I have the version without the holes and the version with the holes. Clearly I have the with the holes version because that's this one, but I don't know if I have both. I'll have to look into that at some point. The sculpt just looks so nice on this, and again, so similar to the Crash McCreary artwork that I've always wanted to repaint one, and I just haven't so far, but that's definitely something I'm going to have to get to at some point. But the sculpt of this, again, especially for its time, it is so marvelously detailed. Like, it really is extremely highly detailed. Kenner was no joke when it comes to the sculpting of their figures, and including lots of really nice, impressive, fine detail. This Dilophosaurus absolutely is loaded with beautiful sculpt, beautiful skin texture, skin wrinkles, folds, even the rib cage and everything shining through. So it's definitely a very impressive sculpt, and as I had said earlier, probably one of the closest versions as far as screen accuracy goes from any of the original toy line figures. It also has some pretty nice paintwork to it. It's got paint from head to tail. The only thing it's really missing is nail paint. Outside of that, I think the paintwork looks really good. And, you know, considering this figure is so old, I'm impressed at how nice the paintwork and the quality of the figure as a whole is still to this day. And honestly, the same can be said for most of my Kenner figures. These were definitely made to last, and they absolutely do, or at least as far as mine do. And I played with them pretty heavily as a child. But the figure doesn't really have much in the way of articulation or anything. The only articulated joints really are the legs. That's it. You can't move the arms, which is a bummer. You don't have an articulated jaw, which is also a bummer. But there are other Kenner figures as well that don't include those things, like articulated jaws, like the Screaming Velociraptor and stuff. But the fact that the figure has that kind of real feel rubber for most of the body sort of allows you to have more articulation with it. It's just not something you can do like as far as posing it, but you can move it around and articulate it that way because it's so flexible. So there is a nice playability to that part of the figure, but there's not really much in the way of articulation outside of the legs. And the action feature is fun. It's definitely fun, and I had a lot of fun with it as a child, but as an adult, again, it's not the greatest thing in the world. Definitely takes me back just even trying to operate the action feature, but as you can see, currently it's not working so well, and I don't ever remember it working perfectly, you know, back in the day, but it's just not really doing so great right now either. But as a whole, it is still an absolutely epic figure, one that I absolutely love. Again, probably one of my favorite Jurassic Park figures to ever exist. So if you are interested, of course, this is long discontinued, but you can quite easily usually find these on eBay, and they don't normally cost all that much. So make sure you check eBay if you want to add one to your collection, and like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.